What's up, guys? Steven here today. And today, what I wanted to talk to you about is swag design. Now, what do I mean by swag design, right? I think the best way to start off this video is by essentially defining what you're trying to accomplish and the overall goal, vision, purpose of design, right? So for me, design is all about trying to identify the constraints, obstacles, parameters, objective, both primary and secondary, of a particular solution, right? So, for example, for a website, the goal of a website is to achieve a particular goal, right? Now, its vision is to essentially aid in a particular type of operation, right? So maybe like a simple website would only be focused, maybe like someone is what you call when you have something like maybe like a portfolio website, right, or a showcase website, where there is no real functionality to a website, but it's just like home, right, some projects, right, samples of work, services, right, like its goal is not only just to create or show that whoever is the business owner, the person that is being showcased, is available in the on the digital medium, but it's also to essentially give an idea of what that person's work is like and even what that person is like, right? So in that case, for that kind of website, its overall vision is to convey the energetic tone of that person, right? It's to kind of like um, this put their personality out there in some way, right? This isn't always the case, but this is like a general idea, right? Maybe now, for example, if you're thinking about a website that's like displaying an app, right? The goal is more it's it is to showcase maybe the app's features, right? But it's also to showcase um, it's also to help people identify what that app is used for and how it could be beneficial to them, right? So in that sense, it's not so much of an app landing page, so to speak, but it's like a sales asset, because from there, if maybe in that website there's a call to action to download the app or to maybe get more information on signing up to the platform, right? If it's related to like a web app or some sort of CRM, then the idea behind the website is to generate sales, leads, all that kind of things, right? My point in saying all this is that the purpose of design is to achieve a goal, right? But to better understand what goal you're achieving, you have to understand the vision behind why that goal is so important, right? And it kind of ties back to this whole primary and secondary objective, right? Um, as a side note, I think this is probably why Guild Wars, like the game, was just so fucking fun for me to play, because um, the secondary missions in and of themselves were fucking game changers. Like they literally brought on like skills, weapons, and stuff, items that could really change the game for the player. Right? It wasn't just all about completing the primary missions or the primary quests and like winning the game, but it was like about building an incredibly well-rounded character, right? But to tie back to design, I feel like um, all too often it's something that's kind of overlooked, because people believe that the more important thing is to just put out a product, right? The more important thing is the development. But my point is, if you think about it, um, building code, writing code in of itself is not hard, right? There's a million and one different ways to implement a searching algorithm, right? There's a million and one different ways to implement a sorting algorithm. There's a million and one different ways to implement a website, to build a website. You can use HTML and CSS, you can use JavaScript, right? You can use fucking jQuery, right? There's all these different programming languages. So ultimately the implementation doesn't really matter. But my point is how, or the thought behind why implementing this or that is more important than the implementation itself. And this is because it is the thing that essentially maps all the actions that will drive the result that you want, right? So another way of putting it is people focus too much on the steps, step 1, 2, 3, without really thinking about how to come about or how to go about creating the best steps possible, right? And that's kind of my bit behind design. But mainly the reason why I wanted to say that is because I feel like if we actually took more time to actually sit down and paint as clear of a picture of the problem domain, as they call it in software engineering, or if you want another simpler words, like the multi-dimensional context that the problem finds itself in, that we're finding ourselves in. And if we take more time to really clearly repaint the scenario that we're faced with, we're going to have a much clearer understanding of what actually needs to be done, right? Because to bring it all back, at the end of the day, you're essentially just trying to create a solution, right? You're creating a solution to a problem, right? But the best way to create a solution is by understanding your problem. And I feel like all too often, we only focus on understanding one aspect of the problem, right? The same way that people maybe when they're sick, right? They're only focused on just getting rid of the symptom pain, right? Maybe someone has like heart problems, like chronic heart problems all the time, right? Maybe instead of most people are just focused on removing or alleviating the heart issue, right? Maybe taking the vitamins or medicine, whatever necessary, to essentially fix their heart palpitation issues, as opposed to getting down to what is actually the root cause of those heart problems. Maybe you're just out of shape and you're obese and your body has way more fat than it needs, and it's not burning that fat at a healthy rate. It's storing and taking on too much, and so now not only are you just bogged down physically with all this fat just almost essentially suffocating and choking your muscles and cells and causing a lack of circulation in key areas, but now it's affecting your mind too, right? Affecting the way you think about yourself, affecting the way you see life and even what's possible, right? And so my point is, I feel like by focusing on trying to find the root problem and really, really digging down deep on what that actually is, how did it come about? Why is it there, right? Maybe it's something that's been there for a long time just by the essence of the scenario that you find yourself in, right? Maybe it's something that just came about because of the advent or the addition of something else, right? It might be related to another thing. By focusing on really getting a higher level understanding of why that is and why it's there, I feel like you'll have a better understanding of what needs to happen to solve it. And so my point in this is that ultimately design, I feel like, comes from a deep understanding and a deep awareness of the problem itself, right? It comes from a deep understanding of what you're doing, right? And I think that it's one of the things that are too often rushed because people just feel like it's not as necessary, right? But if you realize that actually it's strategy and not, I don't want to use the word tactics, but it's like a well thought out course of action that ultimately win the war, right? That ultimately achieve the results, then people would completely have a different approach to everything that they're doing, right? So, personally, that's something that I've really been striving to do more of lately because I'm just realizing that um, everything my goal is to essentially create assets, right? And so, how do you make something an asset? By making it valuable, and then but then the question is, how do you make something valuable? Well, that all depends on what the thing you're dealing with is, right? And so that's where those higher level conversations need to come about. And I personally feel as if the more and more I'm doing this, not only am I just able to be more of a service because I'm able to more strategically align my skill sets to achieve like a really, really high quality solution. But more importantly, I feel like I'm able to help the person who's facing the problem understand what he's experiencing, right? Like, because a lot of people, maybe for example, um, they want a website that is like a simple one page um, for to just get their name out there, and it's a way for people to find them, and it has to be just simple, right? But then when you dig down to it, you when you ask yourself why do you need a website, you start realizing that there is actually a bigger purpose to it, right? And something that I've really been focusing on lately is literally taking a pen and paper and drawing using stick figures or whatever it has may, like the sequence of events that come about from a person meeting that business, um, exchanging money to that or giving money to that business, and then receiving the assets that they paid for, right? And I try to add as much granularity and like detail as possible because it helps me better pinpoint where the what place where is the place that the website has in this whole process, right? In this whole sequence of events. And I feel like the more and more I can understand that, the better and better I can make the website be. Because now it's not only just this placeholder, so to speak, with the person's name on it, but it has all these functionalities that are actually useful to optimizing that business's workflow, right? It has functionalities that help with like payment, right? With that help with invoicing, that help with like um, customer relations, right? Things like that. Things that are um, minute in a sense that they're components that are not as like flashy or attention grabbing as, for example, um, an incredibly interactive slider or a really really rich like light box or gallery box, right? Or even like an incredibly sizzling marketing campaign, right? So I feel like the more granularity and the more thought and detail that you add to your design, the better it'll be, right? And then something that I'm also noticing more and more is that um, in that design, you're also able to understand the challenges and I don't want to say threats, but the issues that that person might face, right? So, um, for example, I always one thing like one realization I realized is that the reason why Unix or Mac or the Linux or Unix, if you want, essentially surpassed or gained an advantage over Microsoft was because there was they thought about security from its conception, right? Microsoft just said, hey, if we just hide our path, then we'd be good. But Unix went an extra level and added access controls, right? User rights and user file permissions. And so even if you knew the path, you still had to go through a door. so to speak. And something that I actually wanted to mention is that I feel like the best design kind of instilled this idea of um, it's like a door or security or a maze, so to speak, something that like defines lanes, that defines the way that people interact with it. It defines the way that people um, exchange information or manipulate its data, and it also defines what should be um, captured as far as data goes, right? Like, what is the data that should be like an entity that should have its own data structure, right? And then like, what are the key primary functions that are critical to essentially making the most use of that data, right? So all these things are really vital, and I feel like the more and more you can see how everything is interrelated, simply by having that picture of the sequence of events in front of you, and then translating it into like the entities or the different types of data that are going to be necessary for the optimum execution of that solution, then I feel like when it comes to implementing it, it will just be a piece of cake, because you'll know that, for example, because of the requirements of this particular solution, there is a bet it's more beneficial to go with one technology over another, right? Like, it's better to go with something that's more basically server side, and then let something for the front end handle the front end, right? That way there's no um, crisscrossing between technologies, maybe like issues of deadlocks, things trying to access each other at the same time, because you're essentially separating the duties in such a thoughtful way, right? Um, and to that, I feel like one of the biggest, I think our biggest challenge going forward is the fact that there's going to be so many tools, right? And with the advent of a new tool, a new platform every day that is supposed to be making our life easier, the challenge is going to be essentially, how do you use what, where, when, and how, right? Like, it's going to be figuring out how to actually use the tool right, because there's just going to be so many of them, and you might almost feel like this sense of overwhelm, right? And I feel like people are most likely just going to gravitate towards what they've been using this whole time, because they're just so comfortable with it. But I feel like it's almost like a duty to just not only just be constantly educated, but then to constantly just challenge yourself to try something new, because you might realize that, hey, this new thing does something that you've been struggling to do with your current tool or current hammer, so to speak, for the longest time, in a way that's way more efficient than what you've been using. And I think that's actually going to be the biggest challenge going forward. But that's kind of my spiel on that. But essentially, the gist is really like refine, hone down on, try to like get an accurate representation. I don't like, I want to use the word process simply because it's kind of what's most relatable, but I'm more thinking about like the sequence of events, like the key frame, right? Like, from moment to moment to moment, what is happening. If you can draw it out, and like, even as redundant as it seems, even as annoying as it seems, it's going to pay off so much, infinitely in the whole, later on in the life cycle of the project, because the fact that you actually went that extra step forward to ensure that you're on the same page with the client, maybe with the other members of your team, right? The fact that you went that extra step forward to make sure you guys were on the same page paid off, because now, by you guys going that extra step forward, you were forced to answer questions that were dealing with like subtle nuances of the system, of the solution that you were building. And so because they were resolved at that critical stage of solution conception, it's not it essentially makes the rest of the project so much easier because um, when someone, oh, hey, so I'm coding this, and then this is an issue that might potentially happen, like an erroneous or abnormal behavior of the system of this or of the solution. How should we handle it? And then someone can be like, oh, actually, it's, remember we kind of talked about that, and you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense, and you don't have to like spend all this time going back to like the design and planning stage to essentially remodify the solution altogether simply because of that. And I think doing this just saves an insane amount of time, energy, and like money, right? Because you're just going by that old adage of doing things well the first time you do it. Anyways, hope you guys get something out of it. As always, swag the fuck out.